Is Tennessee the number one team in the country? It's kind of a two-part question, right? That question is going to be definitively answered this weekend when first-ranked Georgia plays second-ranked Tennessee. But I think that I can make an argument that Tennessee should be the number one team in the country based on what they've done this season. So it's kind of a two-part question. Should Tennessee be ranked number one, which I believe they should, and I'll make an argument for that. But also, who's going to win this weekend in that clash of titans? In what will possibly be the most important game, or one of the most important games of the year. I think up until this point, Alabama-Tennessee was a huge game that knocked Alabama at the moment out of playoff contention and put Tennessee into that playoff conversation. I think Michigan-Ohio State could be the biggest game of the year, but Tennessee-Georgia has pretty massive repercussions because one of these teams is going to be fighting uphill to make it into the playoff after this weekend. So this is a big game. Up until this point, comparing resumes is a little difficult because depending on the criteria you use to gauge these teams, Georgia gets some favoritism because they were the national champion last year. So naturally they get that boost because of that. They're also one of the most talented teams in the country. Now, some people don't look at recruiting. They say it doesn't matter, which is false because recruiting does matter in college football. But how much do you use what a team has done this year compared to, say, what they did last year and the recruiting background that they have? Because Georgia is one of the most talented teams in the country. When you look at recruiting from 2018 to 2022, you've got the first-ranked, second-ranked, first-ranked, fourth-ranked, and third-ranked recruiting classes in college football. And to compare that to Tennessee, you have from 2018 to 2022, you have the 21st ranked, 13th, 11th, 22nd, and 17th ranked classes. Now, the transfer portal has a bit of an effect on total team talent now, more so than before. But obviously, Georgia is an incredibly talented team. However, when you look at what these two teams have done this season, Georgia has not played the schedule that Tennessee has. Tennessee has played one of the most difficult schedules in all of college football. And it's kind of a story of two halves. Before Tennessee's bye week, they had a close overtime win against a top 25 Pitt team on the road, and they beat a top 25 Florida team at home in a close 38-33 win. After their bye week, they go on the road to play a ranked LSU, and they murder LSU at home 40-13. That's when everyone started taking Tennessee seriously. They then upset third-ranked Alabama at home as well in a 52-49 shootout. To me, it wasn't a fluky win by any means for Tennessee. There were a lot of penalties in that game for both teams, and Alabama deserved the majority of the penalties they got. So Tennessee also murdered 19th ranked Kentucky 44-6. So Tennessee is a legit team. In Georgia, to their credit, have defeated a couple of good teams. They beat a top 10 Oregon 49-3 the first game of the season. Granted, that was head coach Dan Lanning's first game for the Oregon Ducks, playing his former team, Georgia, in Atlanta. So definitely a difficult place to play for your first game as a head coach if you're Oregon. And their most recent win over Florida gave them a bit more credit as well, beating Florida 42-20. But in between that, you have that 26-22 win over Missouri where they nearly lost to Missouri. That was a field goal fight on the road, almost losing that game. They also struggled against Kent State. And in the first half, that was pretty much anybody's ball game. So in college football, it does matter how you win, not just winning. In the NFL, if you win, that's all that matters. But in college football, it matters how you win. So you have a couple really nice performances for Georgia and a couple questionable performances against not-so-great teams as well. So I'm looking at the schedules for these two teams, and I've got 5 ranked wins for Tennessee, 2 of those on the road, one of those 5 ranked wins against a third-ranked Alabama team. So Tennessee's legit. Georgia, to their credit, also like a great team. Like, I'm not debating that Georgia isn't a great team. But up until this point in the season, I actually think Tennessee deserves to be ranked number 1 in the country because what a team did last year and the recruiting background that they have means a lot less to me than what has happened this season. It would be a lot easier to argue for Georgia as the number 1 team in the country if they didn't struggle against Missouri and Kent State. But they did. It happens. But if I'm splitting hairs between who should be the number 1 team in the country, I think that is what gives it to Tennessee, in my opinion. Now, the second part of that conversation, though, is who's going to win this weekend. And when you look at the statistics for these teams, the obvious thing for Tennessee is that offensively they're a juggernaut. Tennessee's the number one team in the country in terms of total offense and the number one scoring offense in the country, led by Heisman candidate Hendon Hooker at quarterback. The ridiculous thing about Hendon Hooker, transfer quarterback, he has a 21-1 touchdown to interception ratio this season. And last season, he only threw 33 interceptions to 31 touchdowns. So between this season and all of last season, you're talking about 52 touchdowns to 4 interceptions playing in the SEC, which is just absolute video game numbers. He's an incredible quarterback. They only run it as much as they really need to at Tennessee. And defensively, they have struggled. But Josh Heupel, the head coach for Tennessee, has built this offensive-centric team, kind of like Lincoln Riley at Oklahoma, both of which coming from that Oklahoma tree. But they're a legit team. They get compared a lot to LSU in 2019 because they've beat all these ranked teams so far. They kind of came out of nowhere this year with a transfer quarterback to boot. And I'm not saying that people are trying to make a literal comparison, but there are substantial differences. One being the fact that over the last 20 years, LSU had been one of the best teams in all of college football versus Tennessee, who has been very bad the last 20 years. And recruiting just isn't there for Tennessee. And I'm going to, again, recruiting isn't everything. But when you look at, say, LSU in 2019, leading up to that class from 2016 to 2019, they had the 3rd ranked, 7th ranked, 15th, and 6th ranked classes in college football. So there's just a big difference in the recruiting that LSU had building up to that national championship team and what Tennessee has. Again, it's not everything, but projecting forward, I think that might be a problem for Tennessee in terms of competing for a national championship. So I don't know if they're going to, moving forward, be a national championship team. But up until this point, I do think they deserve to be the number one team in the country. But how they match up with Georgia, you've got this phenomenal offense, and the only thing really going for them defensively is that they get turnovers. But you look at Georgia and what Georgia has done on this season, not against as many good teams, which matters, right? Because they haven't played 5 ranked teams like Tennessee has. But they're 4th in the country in terms of total defense, and they're the 2nd ranked team in terms of scoring defense. So they have a phenomenal defense despite losing a ton of elite defenders from last year's team. I think they had 3 defenders get drafted in the first round last year. They had an incredible defense last season. They still have a great defense this season. And offensively, they don't put up as many points as Tennessee. They've beat up on lesser competition, but the thing I really focus on with their offense is how efficient they are on 3rd and 4th down. That's important to look at with Georgia. And they're the 4th fewest penalized team in college football, which if you look at the Alabama game, that was a huge problem for Alabama. Alabama is one of the most penalized teams in all of college football, and that definitely affected them in the game. So you have this efficient offense for Georgia with a very good, borderline elite defense, and they're a disciplined team versus Tennessee, who they're going to beat you through the air. They have this high-flying offense, and they're able to get turnovers on defense. But I think the problem for Tennessee is that Georgia's going to play ball how they want to play ball. They're going to try to maintain time of possession. They're going to run the ball on you. They're going to be efficient with Stetson Bennett, and Stetson Bennett is having a good season for them at quarterback for Georgia. So they're controlling time of possession, running the football. What their defensive plan will be against Tennessee, I don't know. But I would have to think that they're going to look at what Alabama did and think, okay, we're going to need to do the opposite of what Alabama did. This is a tough game for both teams, but because it is in Athens, Georgia, I do think Georgia will win the game. So I know it kind of sounds redundant that I proclaim Tennessee as the number one team in college football when I think they're going to lose to Georgia this weekend. But again, it's 2 separate conversations. It's kind of like the playoff. You may get murdered in the playoff, but if you deserve to be there, that is a separate conversation. And that's an important distinction that I think fans need to make. So that is my take on the Georgia-Tennessee situation. I do think Georgia's going to win. And in terms of if Tennessee can be a playoff team despite losing to Georgia, it is absolutely possible. I think that's the next thing Tennessee fans will be thinking of is, can we make the playoff if we lose to Georgia? I absolutely think they could. They've got Missouri, South Carolina, and Vanderbilt the following 3 weeks, which I do believe they'll win. So they're probably an 11-1 team. But if Georgia wins, even if they lose a game after beating Tennessee, they're still playing for the SEC. So it's tough for Georgia or Tennessee to make it in if they lose this game. That will get sorted out, though, moving forward. The biggest thing, though, right now, obviously for both teams, is win the game. I think Tennessee could win. It's absolutely possible. Georgia hasn't played an offense like Tennessee. But I'm going to give Georgia the win right now. And after this weekend, the playoff picture is going to look very different from how it looks right now, where you currently have Georgia at 1, Ohio State and Tennessee tied for 2, and Michigan at 4, because you have 2 teams tied for 2nd. But thank you for listening, everybody. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already. I like to produce college football content across the board, trying to talk about a lot of teams nationally if I can. So again, thank you for listening, and let's see who wins this clash of Titans this weekend.